Russia lays mines at industrial level ahead of Ukrainian counteroffensive. When Ukrainian forces launch their long-awaited counteroffensive this summer, they will be up against multiple lines of Russian fortifications stretching hundreds of miles from the Black Sea to Ukraine's northern border. The military hazards include trenches and anti-tank obstacles, but Russian soldiers have also been busy laying thousands of landmines. What we're seeing is just industrial level. Industrial mine laying, said Michael Newton, the head of landmine clearing organization Halo Trust's Ukraine program. Beyond the military challenge posed to advancing Ukrainian troops, Russian minefields will likely cause hundreds of civilian deaths and require billions of dollars to be safely removed in the coming years, experts told the Moscow Times. Russia is using a mixture of anti-tank and anti-personnel mines, according to a report from the British Royal United Services Institute released earlier this month. Mines are an integral part of defensive fortifications like those in Russian-occupied areas of southern and eastern Ukraine, which are usually designed to funnel advancing infantry into positions that leave them vulnerable to counterattacks and artillery barrages. We use them to mine certain crossroads to cover our troops on the flanks, so that the enemy doesn't break through. One Russian soldier said in a video posted to Telegram by the Russian Defense Ministry last week. Mines being used range from the TEM-62, which detonates under the weight of a passing vehicle, to the advanced PTCOM, which uses sensors to detect and drop a submunition on vehicles. Human Rights Watch has documented the use of more than a dozen different kinds of mines in Ukraine since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion last year. These include banned rocket-fired anti-personnel mines, also known as butterfly mines, that the organization claimed have been deployed by Ukraine. Unlike Russia, Ukraine is one of 164 states to have ratified the 1997 Ottawa Treaty that seeks to eliminate the use of anti-personnel mines. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said in January that Russia had created the largest minefield in the world in Ukraine, claiming that over 40% of the country was contaminated with mines. Landmines are notoriously difficult to find, either by soldiers on the ground or by analysts looking at satellite imagery. Nevertheless, experts told the Moscow Times that Russia was almost certainly deploying mines alongside concrete dragon's teeth, hedgehogs, made of iron, barbed wire, trenches, and ditches in its massive network of defensive fortifications. You would lose a lot of the purpose and usefulness of these fortifications if you didn't combine them with minefields, said Pasi Parawainen, an open-source analyst affiliated with the Finnish Blackbird Group. They are really a key part of the entire equation. Mines have likely been laid all around Russia's defensive positions, which are particularly dense in southern Ukraine, where many believe Kiev's forces will seek to achieve a breakthrough. Based on his analysis, Parawainen said it appeared Russia had started building fortifications further away from the front lines and gradually inched construction closer as time went on. It was continuing to reinforce them as spring turned to summer. A Ukrainian explosive ordnance disposal expert working in eastern Ukraine, who requested anonymity to speak freely, told the Moscow Times that he sees mines almost everywhere in vegetable gardens, houses, fields. Many traps were set in administrative buildings and houses of de-occupied territories, he wrote in a message. At least 271 people have been killed and more than 500 wounded by mines and other explosive remnants of war since the Kremlin ordered tanks into Ukraine last year, the United Nations said earlier this month. There are few ways of dealing with landmines while combat is ongoing, according to Matthew Van Dyke, the founder of Sons of Liberty International, a Washington-based organization that has sent U.S. veterans to train Ukrainians on landmine removal. They don't really have time to detect if they're under fire, he said, so the general rule is just to avoid it. Instead, the task of eliminating the threat usually falls on professional deminers after the fighting has ended. But demining is fraught with danger and can be eye-wateringly expensive. The World Bank recently estimated that removing all explosive ordnance in Ukraine could cost $37.06 billion over the next 10 years. And the economic dimension of the issue is made more pronounced because Ukraine relies heavily on its agricultural industry, and mines make farming extremely risky. Soviet and Russian troops have long used landmines, with Soviet forces deploying them extensively in Afghanistan in the 1980s and Russian soldiers laying mines in Chechnya during separatist wars in the mid-1990s and early 2000s. In both cases, the consequences are difficult to measure, but they appear to be brutal and long-lasting. Since the late 1980s, for instance, an average of 110 people have been killed or injured by landmines and unexploded ordnance in Afghanistan each month, according to the United Nations. Mines were also used extensively by Russian-backed separatists when they launched an insurgency in Ukraine 2014. The years that followed saw sporadic mine laying in eastern Ukraine, according to Human Rights Watch, a precursor to the mass mining underway at the moment. Newton, the Halo Trust regional director, said that there will likely be a spike in casualties as displaced Ukrainians return home. Before the invasion last year, he said his organization estimated it would take 20 years to fully clear eastern Ukraine of mines. But now it will likely take significantly longer. Regardless of the threat of landmines, people in many parts of Ukraine don't have a choice but to get out and still do their business, Newton said. This is ultimately the new normal being created for the Ukrainian people. Russia sentences 8 mobilized soldiers to prison for deserting in Ukraine. A Russian military court has sentenced 8 mobilized soldiers to prison terms of up to 7 years for deserting their unit in eastern Ukraine, the independent Mediazona news website reported Tuesday, citing their lawyer. The soldiers had been sent to a field camp in the Moscow occupied region of Luhansk after being drafted in September as part of the Kremlin's partial military mobilization for the war, Mediazona said. The soldiers, who complained of a lack of equipment and provisions, had been set to go to the front on deck 24, but fled the camp in order to save life and health, lawyer Yevgeny Savskol told Mediazona. According to Mediazona, they then went to the Moscow region town of Podolsk and handed over the weapons issued to them during their military service to the police. A military court in the Baltic exclave of Kaliningrad found all 7 men guilty of desertion committed by an organized group and failure to comply with orders during a period of mobilization or armed conflict, Mediazona reported. Junior Sergeant Yevgeny Kravchenko and Private Alexander Bogachenko were sentenced to 7 years in prison. Sailor Alexander Babeshko and Private Nikolai Komashev to 6 years. And mobilized reservists Dmitry Medvedev, Alexander Elisi, Igor Medvedev, and Denis Balakhin to 6.5 years. Russia introduced lengthy jail terms for wartime acts, including desertion and voluntary surrender, shortly after the start of its mobilization campaign last year. According to the law, desertion during a period of mobilization or wartime is punishable by up to 10 years in prison, while conscientious objectors face a sentence of up to 3 years. Europe's leaders meet in Russia's shadow. European Political Community Summit held in Moldova, in a region Putin sees as part of Moscow's sphere of influence. Gathering more than 40 European leaders in Moldova on Thursday will be a symbolic thumb in Vladimir Putin's eye, a sign of collective commitment to join hands against Moscow. It's also a major risk. Literally and metaphorically, the so-called European Political Community's second summit is taking place in Russia's backyard, a region Putin sees as part of Moscow's sphere of influence. That makes getting several dozen world leaders in and out no easy task. Moldova has closed its airspace for the duration of the summit, and NATO surveillance planes will keep a watchful eye, a nod to the constant threat of Russian incursions. Access to the main airport has been restricted, a recognition of the myriad fake bomb alerts there since the start of the war. And most leaders won't stay overnight, preferring to keep their visit to a minimum. The measures illustrate Europe's daunting task as it tries to embrace a wider community of countries. The outreach inevitably involves wading directly into a sea of Russian menace and overtures. Moldova, an ex-Soviet country of 2.6 million sandwiched between the EU and Ukraine, is a prime example. The country has been trying to chart a path toward EU membership under pro-Western President Maya Sandu, but it is also battling multiple Russian threats, not only in the breakaway Transnistria region, but also through a constant barrage of assaults on its democracy, energy supply, and communications. Sandu even said Moldova had recently foiled a Russian-backed coup attempt. That makes the summit location a signal that Moldova matters, Moldovan foreign minister told Politico ahead of the summit. It shows that the whole continent stands by Moldova and Ukraine in this difficult time in European history, he added. Risk fees. Reward. Thursday's one-day summit is the largest international event ever hosted by Moldova, which declared its independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. According to Anastasia Poshiambin, a researcher for the German Council on Foreign Relations, the summit represents an unprecedented undertaking for the country. It's a challenge, but it's also a big opportunity to showcase Moldova. It's a big stretch for the administration because the government is dealing with so many issues and crises at the same time, Poshiambin said. Moldova has gone beyond the usual security measures for the event, in part because of the country's precarious geographical location, perched on the edge of the Black Sea, bordering Ukraine and with Russian soldiers stationed just 50 kilometers away from the capital. In addition to the aviation restrictions, the country is essentially locking in residents near Castle Mimi, a winery strategically chosen to host the summit 35 kilometers outside the capital, Chisinau. Locals have been asked to carry special permits to leave their homes while leaders are around, and Moldovans have been given a public holiday. Journalists are also only permitted to travel to Castle Mimi on 2 specially chartered trains, leaving at 6 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. from the Chisinau Central train station. It's an illustration of what Moldovans have to deal with every day, living under daily pressure from the Russians, said Anne Genitet, a French lawmaker with the Renaissance Party of French President Emmanuel Macron, an early advocate of the Upsiki. The difficulties illustrate why it is so important to help them. The scale of the summit itself is also smaller than the inaugural European Political Community gathering in Prague last year. That's partly due to security reasons and partly the result of resource limitations. Some delegations are being forced to arrive on smaller jets than usual, for instance, because of the airport's limited capacity. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Wednesday canceled completely. Behind the scenes, Western capitals and the EU have also been advising Moldova on everything from communication security to anti-corruption measures, according to Popescu and French officials. And France sent several delegations to Moldova to help with preparations, the Elysee said. Still, many of those involved in the preparations for the summit downplayed the security risks involved in holding the gathering. There is a natural level of alert and a security observation, as with any summit, but with a particular attention given the region where it takes place, said an Elysee official in a briefing with the press. We have done what was needed to help the Moldovans to make the summit secure. Popescu, too, noted that hybrid attacks have intensified in the last year and a half, but insisted that Moldova has been used to withstanding these kinds of pressures for many years. For the summit, he added, we have been working closely with our partners to secure full-spectrum security for all of the leaders who will be on our soil. We're very confident the summit will take place in a calm and secure atmosphere. Moldova's trajectory. The logistical difficulties involved in organizing the summit are, in some ways, a metaphor for the struggles Moldova has experienced on its path to possible EU membership. After years of inching along the road to EU accession, Moldova was formally granted candidate status alongside Ukraine last June. The EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, reaffirmed the country's aspirations on Wednesday, speaking at the opening of a new EU civilian mission in Chisinau. The EU and Moldova are on the same page, he insisted. Yet concerns remain about Moldova's fitness for EU membership. Not least its need to reform the judiciary and state institutions and fight corruption, priorities for Sandu since she was elected first as prime minister in 2019 and then as president the following year. Though Moldova wants accession talks to start by the end of the year, that might be an unrealistic timeline for some countries. But some believe that Thursday's summit may change minds. Notably, it will be the first time many of the leaders will have visited Moldova. The summit may be an eye-opener, said Vadim Pistrinchis, a former member of the Moldovan parliament and government minister, now with the Institute for Strategic Initiatives, IPIS, ultimately the way Moldova. And of course, Ukraine in particular resisted the challenges of the past year or more has been revelatory. Many people were very pessimistic when Russia invaded. Moldova is hoping that this undeniable goodwill will result in some deliverables from Thursday's summit. perhaps including more pledges of energy cooperation between the EU and Moldova as the country continues to reorientate its gas supply away from Russia. Brussels already moved to sanction the pro-Russian Moldovan oligarch Elon Shore this week, long a request of the Moldovan government. But for the bigger question of EU membership, Moldova is unlikely to get the answer it wants on Thursday. That verdict may not come until December, when EU leaders will return to the tricky issue of membership status for Ukraine and Moldova.